Welcome to an introduction to economics, brought to you by Parkbench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. For more information about Parkbench Tutors, please visit parkbenchtutors.com. In this short podcast, we are going to look at some issues that relate to inequality and social welfare. These include the distribution of income and the taxation of personal income. Income distribution and social welfare are related, and so economists are interested in looking at data that illustrates any inequalities. Much of the data relates to personal incomes, since this is the data which is most readily available. The data indicates that there is considerable inequality between different income groups, between different regions within a country, and between different countries. We are going to look at some of the data which is available. Personal income is made up of different components. The largest part of personal income comes from employment or from self-employment, and this makes up about 80% of all personal income. Investment income, from rent received from property, dividends, interest on savings and other investments, makes up about another 10%, and benefits and other transfers make up the final 10%. A useful guide to the distribution of income is to look at the numbers for each income bracket. The lowest 10%, the poorest decile, were managing on an income of less than £200 a week, whilst the top 10% had incomes in excess of £750 per week. Examination of other figures shows how misleading figures relating to weekly wages or salary can be. These figures show income for chief executive officers, and the total adds in benefits received in other ways, including through stock and share options. The average in the United Kingdom is around £34,600 per week, the highest in the world outside of the United States. Put in easy terms, it takes someone in the bottom 10% of income earners in the United Kingdom 3 years to earn the same amount that a chief executive officer is paid for 1 week. The inequality is further highlighted after taxation is taken into consideration. Over the past 40 years, the tax rates for the highest earners have halved, whilst those of the lowest earners have remained almost the same. We can also look at inequality by considering the effect it has on others, which means those who are not earning. The number of children living in poverty has increased and almost doubled in a period of around 30 years. When a person loses their job, they may be able to find work quickly, or the search could take longer if the level of unemployment is high. During the search period, the unemployed need support or risk falling into poverty. The map here shows comparative risks of falling into poverty for a number of European nations. In the United Kingdom, the risk is seen as high and the support seen as low. This map compares the bottom 20% and the middle 60%, that is, the first 80% of income earners, with the top 1%. When adjusted for inflation, the average incomes for the bottom 80% have shown little change, whilst those for the top 1% have risen considerably. A number of studies have been carried out to look at inequality. One of the first was by the Italian economist Pareto. He looked at figures for a number of different countries and came to the conclusion that there was a statistical relationship between the level of income and the number of people earning that income. From this, he concluded that inequality of income was inevitable and policy measures would have little effect. The flaw in his work is that he used historical data that relates to a different form of taxation. The taxes he considered at the time were largely property taxes and do not relate easily to taxation of wages through tax bands. A post-war study concluded that there had been a reduction in inequality, but this was measuring income by households. and this was at a time when there were an increasing number of women entering the workforce, so household incomes were rising. The more recent charts which we presented show the inequality is increasing. There are a number of ways of trying to represent inequality. We will consider two of these. The first is to arrange the population in deciles according to income. The proportion of total income received by each decile can then be determined. In theory, for complete equality, each decile should receive 10% of income. In practice, the top 10% receive over 25%, and the bottom 10% receive less than 3%. Here is an example of this, the figures being for the period 2006 to 2008. The discrepancies here are brought about by looking at wealth, where the bottom 1% have negative wealth. In other words, their debts exceed their assets, while the top 1% each have assets of £1.5 million or more. The Lorenz curve is a method of plotting the decile information about income on a graph, and is one that is frequently used. The frequency distributions are converted to a cumulative figure, and the percentage accumulation of income is the vertical axis. The income recipients are the horizontal axis. A 45-degree line is shown, and this is what the position would be if there were complete equality. The further the curve from this line, the greater the inequality. This map shows how a typical Lorenz curve might appear. A second method of showing data is to look at areas. The Gini coefficient is obtained by the ratio of the area between the curve and the 45-degree line, and the triangle including the 45-degree line. The closer this is to 100%, the greater the inequality. Whilst this gives a useful single figure, it is also flawed because it condenses all the information to a single figure, and so we know little about differences between deciles. If there are two curves that intersect, the Gini coefficient has little meaning for comparative purposes. This shows the triangle referred to for calculation of the Gini coefficient. The map here shows a series of Lorenz curves together with the Gini coefficients. A 45-degree line is used to illustrate an egalitarian state, where all have the same income. A Gini coefficient of 1 or 100% would represent a totalitarian state. In the United Kingdom, we have seen a large shift in the tax burden, with the upper 1% now having lower tax rates. How has this burden changed in other countries? A similar reduction in the burden for higher earners is found when looking at tax rates in the United States. The map shows clearly a drop in the tax rates of almost 50% for the highest earners since 1970. It is interesting to note that this is very similar to the United Kingdom, both in the amount of reduction for the highest earners and the time period considered. Economists are now becoming more interested in seeing how income earnings are related to other factors, in particular the amount of education that is received before a person commences employment. There are 2 points that can be seen from figures like these. The first is that the earnings have fallen for all during the period that these measurements relate to. The second is that the fall is greatest amongst those who received the lowest amount of education. The final columns also tell us that there has been a general increase in unemployment, and that those most affected were the ones with least education. This map has been included because economists in the United Kingdom frequently refer to a north-south divide. On the left, the places with higher average incomes are all in the south of England, whilst those on the right are in the north of England or in Scotland or Wales. The income tax rates and bands for the year 2011-2012 are shown here. Also shown are the allowances for individuals before tax is deducted from earnings. Income inequality is not the only inequality that economists should be concerned with. This chart gives an idea of inequality in social welfare between countries in Europe. In 2011-2012, Spain, Greece, Ireland and Italy were all said to be in crisis with debt, and the future of the euro in Greece was under discussion. Can you notice anything about the position of these countries in this table? International comparisons are very difficult to make, and this map may give an indication why this is so. The map illustrates tax rates and social security rates in a number of different countries. We are going to consider only two of these, the relative positions of the United Kingdom, marked here as Britain, and the United States. The figures suggest around 33% of income is lost in the United Kingdom compared to 24% in the United States, lost meaning deducted at source. There is information missing. The United Kingdom provides welfare benefits to residents in the form of a health service, whilst for most of the United States the health insurance needs to be purchased. For a part-time employee in the United States earning around $2,000 a month, a figure of $400 a month for health would be typical as a payment to obtain comparable health coverage. Now, taking this into account, the relative positions of the UK and the USA would be reversed in this table. In fact, in 2012, over 20% of residents in some states, such as Florida, have no health insurance at all because of the high cost. Even more difficult is the task of making comparisons between developed and less developed countries. The map here suggests that inequality in Namibia is much greater than it is in Hungary. This may well be the case, but we should pause and ask ourselves how easy it is to obtain accurate data in a developing country where many may be self-employed. This ends our short podcast on inequality, brought to you by Parkbench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. Thank you for watching and for listening. We wish you success in your studies. For further information about Parkbench Tutors, please visit parkbenchtutors.com.